With the pure amount of FNAF Fangames that have been released over the near enough 9 years since the first original game released, it's only natural that people will always be looking towards the next best FNAF Fangame releasing, and always looking to the future. And it's great that we have such a pleasure of knowing that there are still better Fangames to come. But this does mean that there are going to be games that fall behind, and no matter how big they were at the time, they are destined to fade into obscurity and become forgotten. I believe there is one specific Fangame that falls into this bracket more than any other Fangame, and that game is none other than Final Nights by JeliLiam. I bet it's probably been a while since you've heard the name Final Nights, but I have no doubt that you probably know of it or have at least heard the name before. And for those who haven't, I'll be sure to fill you in. We're going to be covering the 3 main games in the series, which weirdly enough is games 2 to 4, and talking about its overall feel, aesthetic, and gameplay. Before we get into Final Nights 2 as a game, I want to give some of my own personal background when it comes to this game, as it was my first ever experience with FNAF as a whole. I found out about this game when I was just randomly scrolling through YouTube and found a video by 8-Bit Ryan on it. I just so happened to be interested, so I ended up watching the video, not knowing that my life was going to change just from a single video, as after that point I became obsessed with FNAF as a whole, and also discovered my favourite content creator of all time, 8-Bit Ryan, who I still watch to this day over 7 years later. So from this, you can probably guess that this game is extremely nostalgic for me, and this game will always be special to me for that reason alone, but I will not let this nostalgia cause any bias. So with that info, it's time to get into Final Nights 2. Final Nights 2 is an interesting game. First off, I have to mention the controls, because to look around the room, you have to use WAS and D on your keyboard, which is actually really nice, and something I wish that was in more fan games. However, the movements can be a bit janky, some might say. It can be a bit confusing at first, as if you look to your right by pressing D to check the vents, you don't press A to look back around, you have to press D again to go back to looking at the cameras. The cameras is the only place that you can access other locations, such as the door behind you and some wooden box thing. It's not necessarily anything that's too big of an issue, but it can be really confusing to get the hang of at first. So in your office, there are a set of monitors linked to the vents. Most of the animatronics will try to enter your office by crawling through them. To stop them, you need to lock the vent at the right moment, just as they reach the end of the vent. This can be extremely difficult in later nights, as you have animatronics in both vents, and you can only lock one at a time, which means you need some expert timing to survive. Overall, it's a pretty solid gimmick, and I think it's a fine inclusion. To your left, there's some wooden box thing that contains the puppet, and you need to check it every so often and flash him with your light to make him go back to his sitting position. To be honest, I have no idea what happens if you fail to do this, purely based on the fact that it's an extremely simple mechanic, and it is pretty hard to mess it up, to be honest. Finally, behind you is a corridor that you can shine your light down, and depending on whether Foxy or Chica is seen, you have to do one of 2 different things. When they're in their attack phase, you will hear breathing from down the corridor. If it was Foxy, you'd need to run towards the door to close it and stay there until he leaves. But if it was Chica, you simply just need to shine your light down the corridor and she'll run away. So overall, on paper, this game sounds super simple, right? Well, it turns out I suck at this game. First off, when I opened the game, I was immediately placed onto night 3, as I must have beat the previous nights at some point in my free time, and there was no new game button. Not ideal, so I just started from night 3 and thought screw it. And from this point, I had to pick up the mechanics pretty quickly as to not die very early on. Along with this, I could have sworn I was doing what I was supposed to be doing, but it seems that the game had different ideas and got me killed regardless, so that was fun. So if the gameplay for this section sucks, I apologise, that's completely on me. I just suck at the game. I want to mention the character designs for this game too, as I think they're pretty cool. Having the burnt versions of the animatronics is really cool in my opinion. Although Bonnie got done dirty, he is literally just a torso with no head, meaning his jump scare looks like this. I feel bad for you, man. My thoughts on Final Nights 2 as a whole is that it's a pretty solid fan game and worth looking into if you've never played it before, to get a feel of what these older FNAF fan games were like. The controls were a bit confusing at first, but when you get them down after the first night, it'll be fine. So now it's time to move on to Final Nights 3. Final Nights 3 takes place in the hospital, and you play as the crying child in the aftermath of getting chomped down by Fredbear. There are a few different places where the mechanics take place: a balcony, some metal storage box, box or something, and a corridor outside of your room. Reaper Puppet will attack from the balcony and will go through a few phases until he's right by the glass. When he's in this phase, you must run over to the balcony and pull the blinds over to make him leave. Reaper Balloon Boy resides inside this metal storage thing for some reason and will poke his hand out the gap, and you just need to clamp that stupid child's hand with the door and he'll go back to phase 1. I hate you, Balloon Boy. Finally, Springtrap will attack down the right side of the corridor outside your room. When he appears right outside your door going brazy, you just need to go and close the door and he'll leave. I am certain there is at least 1 or 2 more animatronics in this game. I know Mangle is for certain, and I think the other one is Golden Freddy or Fredbear or something, but I don't know. Truthfully, I was unable to make it that far because I find this game quite challenging. I think Mangle's mechanic has something to do with some kind of keypad or like monitor, like heart rate thing next to the door, and Golden Freddy comes down from the left side of the corridor, but don't quote me on this, I can't remember. Whilst all these mechanics sound pretty standard, there is one thing that makes this game extremely unique, and it's the fact that to progress nights, you need to return to your bed and actually sleep, leaving you completely defenseless while you do so. So to do this successfully, you need to make sure you've taken care of all threats before sleeping. This is something that I don't think has been done in any other fan game, or at least not any other ones that I've played, and I like the fact that it's something unique. However, this also means that the nights could realistically last for as long as it possibly could, and that is unreal, and I'm not really the biggest fan of this and prefer the usual set time nights. So as much as I appreciate the creativity, it really isn't all that for me personally, and that's fine. I now want to mention the animatronic designs, as I actually really like them. They have a weird twisted approach to the animatronics that I think looks really good and suits the atmosphere for this game. Reaper Springtrap seems to have taken inspiration from the previous game's design philosophy, which I think is fine. I particularly like the design of Reaper Puppet, as it just looks so creepy and unsettling. Plus his jump scare lead up is actually terrifying and must have been really disturbing for first time players, hence why he's in the thumbnail. Overall, I think it's a decent fan game with some unique ideas, but it's quite the challenge for me personally. Once again, I would definitely recommend giving it a go if you haven't already. Finally, we move on to Final Nights 4. This game takes place in a Fredbear's family diner, which if you've seen my video on Return to the Bloody Nights, go and watch it if you haven't already, you know that this is an aesthetic that I do really enjoy and think there should be more fan games in this environment. But before we even get into the night gameplay, we need to talk about the pre-night stuff, because you get a point and click style investigation sort of gameplay, and you play as a detective trying to uncover what really happened at Fredbear's. I think this is a really nice touch and has some cool gameplay to add as some extra content just before you get into the nights and after the nights. During the earlier nights, you have to start with just Fredbear and Spring Bonnie being threats. Spring Bonnie will approach your office, and when he arrives, he will get right up in your face and do this really creepy animation in which you cannot move at all whilst he does so until he leaves. Fredbear works a bit differently in the sense that he won't try to kill you directly, but will instead go to try to turn off the building's power. So you need to lead him into your office using alarms on the cameras and outside your office, so he can come and scan you to make sure that there are people actually in the room before returning to the show stage and not turning off the power. Fredbear's AI seems to be extremely dodgy and almost RNG based, as you can ring an alarm 1,000,000 times in the room right next to the one he is in, and he will just refuse to move to it and instead go to turn off the power, which makes the night extremely frustrating. I'm sure this is something that JeliLiam has acknowledged on a post on Game Show, so it's a known issue with the game. In later nights, there are 2 more animatronics that become active that involve you to check the vents and gassing certain rooms from the cameras to keep them away. I once again was unable to get this far because of the Fredbear issue, and another time my game quite literally had a fatal error, leaving me to have to use Task Manager to actually close the game. The whole aesthetic and look of this game is amazing. I can even play it at 120 FPS, which is a PC man's dream. But when it comes to the gameplay, it just isn't as enjoyable as it should be on paper due to some major issues with the game. If this wasn't the case, I'm sure I would have really enjoyed this game, but I just can't bring myself to try and play through it all just to have Fredbear's AI kill me. So thoughts on Final Nights 4 is that it's visually amazing and is super smooth, but due to some bugs, it doesn't function as it should. It's really disappointing, and it sucks that this is the case, but it is what it is. So what are your thoughts on the Final Night series? Did you forget it existed until now, just like me? Be sure to let me know in the comments, and I'll be sure to respond to absolutely everyone. Well, that's all from me today then. Have a good day, evening, or night, wherever you are, and I shall see you in the next one. Sorry, that was kind of cringe. I just thought I'd do a different variation of the outro. I'll see you next time.